All right, week 6. So, moving right along. We're, I guess, what, halfway through or so? So, tonight we're going to be talking about loans, personal loans, and home mortgage to a certain extent. We'll be talking about mortgage loans kind of throughout the course. Personal loans are, again, credit can be very useful and also can be very damaging. It just depends how smartly you're able to use it and maintain some control. So, yeah, a lot of times used to finance a large purchase. So it can be anything. What they're talking about here on personal loans are usually loans that are, well, obviously, I guess we're excluding business, and they're going to characterize mortgages in a separate section. Um, and then they're going to go through this whole differentiation between banks, which is kind of meaningless. You're going to go to the place that's got the best rate. And I guarantee it's not going to be a finance company. Not very many companies want to label themselves as strict finance companies because that's kind of a pejorative term for most people. It's not your lender of, it's your lender of last resort because their interest rates are going to be considerably higher, and confiscatory is actually the term where it's, you know, predatory. Other terms like that are used for those kind of people. Yeah, you could use family members, friends, things like that, or like I've said before, and they don't really address it much in the book, and it's not used that much in well, people just don't talk about that much, and I don't know why. But if you've got a 401k or an IRA, man, taking a loan against that is can be done very quickly, and there's no credit check or whatever because you're borrowing money for yourself. Now there are certain provisions. I think the limit on it is still 50,000 max, but it can only be about 50% of your actual amount in there. So let's say you got 100 grand of in your IRA that's been building up, and you can't touch it till you're 59 and a half without penalty, but you can take loans against it, and that's again you just go into your 401k or your IRA, typically on their website, and the provisions are in there. It's pretty easy. Not a lot of fees. The interest, you do pay some interest, but the interest is paid back to you. There is one downside that it's not that much of a downside. The money that's taken out of there is not um, participating in the market at that point. So if the stock were to go up or down or something like that, the money that you have out on a loan for yourself is not in that. Um, and that's actually saved me once or twice when the market has gone down. But anyway, I use these things for business purposes all the time. When I wanted, small business type stuff, but I'd need to buy some equipment for typically for resale. Well, you have different ways you can do that. Business loans are going to be kind of high because businesses, the failure rate is quite high, so the interest rate is going to be quite high. And anyway, there's different options, and by far the cheapest and the best was a taken against my IRA, and then they just deduct it from your salary again. It comes back out as a deduction, and terms are typically 3 to 5 years, something like that. If you quit the company, yeah, you would have to come up with that lump sum, or again, they're just going to take that from your savings and make it some involuntary withdrawal, and it can get kind of ugly if you're switching jobs, but it's certainly doable. Peer-to-peer lending, that's kind of funny. This was kind of fashionable, and I guess it's still out there. What happens here is a lot of individuals, people who are investing, will get organized with one of these peer-to-peer lenders, and the peer-to-peer lender is just the go-between. Peer-to-peer is like well, old school Napster or Pirate Bay, if you know anything about that, where there's a lot of people on one side and a lot of people on the other side, and it's these little small connections. The advantages to the investor, if you say you want to invest in peer-to-peer lending, what they do is they get let's say you invest $4,000 or $5,000 with this company, and they say they're going to get you a return of, 5, 8, 10%, something like that. What they'll do is they'll get your money and they'll loan it out to a lot of these small businesses. But rather than loan it out one big chunk to one business, they'll get your money and they'll split it up. And they'll make all these micro loans to all these different businesses. And so it gives you some diversification because, a lot of these businesses are going to do well and some will fail. Well, the notion is that you're going to have your wins and losses spread out, and so your overall rate of return will be fine, even though there will be some failures in there. So it's a little less dicey than having all your eggs in one basket. And for you as the small business going to get a peer-to-peer loan, because of the way they've got things organized, they may be somebody who's going to give you a loan, whereas some of the traditional banks may not be interested in loaning to your small business. So anyway, different ways to do that. And I guess they can do consumer loans as well. If you need a loan for a refrigerator or a boat or something like that, they might be able to help you out. Lending, I think Cabbage is also out there. As a small businessman, I get a lot of this crap in the mail. And I've never taken them up on it because, like I say, for the type of loans I need as a farmer, I can do stuff through the state that's subsidized, or USDA has subsidized loans, that encourage farming type stuff, or I borrow against my own 401k, IRA kind of stuff. So anyway, but I guess it's pretty popular out there. $1 billion per year provided. So small accounts typically, they do use your credit report, your FICO score. Your FICO is your credit score. So just about any loan's going to use that. Again, this isn't a consideration when you're taking a loan against your own funds. What you might do if you did the loan against your 401k or your IRA. Determining whether a loan is sensible. So, there's a lot of things that go on here. And this is, there's certain things that are, purchases. There's purchases and there's investments. And if you're buying a car, you're not investing in a car. You're buying a car. That is strictly a purchase. Cars depreciate quickly in most cases. I've made quite a bit of money on classic cars, but those were not daily drivers for the most part. But you can do a little bit there, but that's kind of not in the realm of what we're talking about because typically most people have vehicles, or at least their primary vehicles, for commuting, for getting to work, for doing things like that. But anyway, determining whether a loan is sensible, what you have to do is, let's say you're looking at buying a new vehicle and it's, I don't know, $50,000 or something, and the payments are going to be whatever they are, around $1,000, and you decide that that's reasonable. Well, it might be reasonable for a brand new car, but that same car, when it's 4 or 5 years old and is getting tons of miles on it, and now you have maintenance costs as well because it's out of warranty, and your car payment stays the same for the length of the loan, and the resale value on it's not much. I mean, that's where you have to look at it. Most people would consider the payment on those first few months of the car as being well worth it, but that used car that's now can be costing you a little bit more money is maybe not something you'd really be interested in if you thought it through. And there might be other ways to do it. Maybe get something just a few years older. All it takes is a year or two, because that depreciation that comes off of the price you paid for the vehicle, or you're upside down, underwater, whatever you want to call it, where the vehicle is not worth what you purchased it for by a huge sum, that is almost unavoidable in a new car. personal loan process. So if you have these documents that we talked about, that can be helpful, but more likely they're going to want you to maybe the fact that you'll have access to that data, but you'll probably have to type it into their own application. They won't necessarily take your documents without it. Loan contract. Read the details on that. Another thing that and this may or may not be a big deal to y'all, but like I say, I buy a lot of big, heavy equipment type items, and sometimes the people, especially the auction houses, are always very keen on you getting a loan through them. And I'll never ever do it because there's a problem with just about all the loans that are offered through those companies is that there's a prepayment penalty. So what that means is if you own a home or a home, I'm already kind of getting ahead of myself, but if you decide you want to pay off the loan early, they will hit you with a penalty because they figure they're entitled to that interest that would have been paid had you kept up with the loan. So let's say you've got this loan for 50, 60 grand. You're like, I'm tired of paying interest on this. I've got, I sell the piece of equipment or I sell the home and I just want to close out this old loan. With a prepayment penalty or early payment penalty, they will make you pay the interest that they would have gotten. And so it doesn't happen in the States in real estate, but I encountered this on a German home where I just wanted to finish off the loan and pay it off in full. And I owed whatever, some $100,000 on it, and I actually had to come up with like 120 because they by law felt that they were entitled to the interest I would have paid had I kept the loan for the length of term. So anyway, you got to read the fine print and see if there's caveats or little technical deals in there that make the loan not as attractive as it would be. Repayment schedule. So there's an amortization schedule. Amortization is just the payments divided up into equal sums. What happens though is as you pay a loan, and we'll look at this for say real estate loans. Let's say you have a 30-year fixed real estate loan. When you first purchase the home, you'll be paying almost exclusively interest and very little on the principal. The principal is, let's say the loan was for $300,000. For that first year, you'll probably owe, you'll pay payments that may equate to $20,000, worth of payments. But your principal will probably only go down by $1,000 or two because just about all of that money is being used to pay interest. Whereas towards the end of the loan, year 29 or whatever, a very small part of that will be used to pay the interest, and just about all of it will be used to pay the principal. Doesn't make a big difference to you. It's fairly transparent, but what it does make a difference is in terms of your taxes, because the interest that you pay on mortgage loans, on real estate loans, is tax deductible. Personal loans and things like that we're talking about in this section, that money is just gone. There is no tax deduction for personal loan interest paid. Also, the maturity, the life of the loan. So longer maturity equals lower payments, but more interest is paid over the life of the loan. But keep in mind, inflation still occurs. So when I was growing up, my parents had a nice home, and I remember that their mortgage payment was $133 a month. I mean, that might have been big money when they bought that home and whenever they did in the 70s. But it certainly wasn't by the time they, were paying off the loan. So keep in mind that, the time value of money that, I this home's going to end up costing me $1 million by the time I pay all the interest. Well, 30 years from now, $1 million won't get you a whole lot. So it's important to look at all the numbers, but it's also important to keep in mind the time value of money. Collateral is what makes a loan secured. The fact that there's something to be repossessed, that there's something named in the loan. You have what they're talking about here, a secured loan and an unsecured loan. Sometimes we'll call unsecured loans something like a signature loan, or a loan that's just guaranteed by your name, by your signature, but there's no identified assets. Now they could still come after things saying that you owe them money, but they're not named in the contract, so it's a little bit more difficult. And lawyers aren't cheap, and the likelihood of them prevailing is less risky than if it had been like a home loan or a auto loan where the vehicle or the home is actually specified. Then it's very transparent, and they can just repossess, and they feel protected. Therefore, when they're protected and comfortable, the interest rate's lower. Co-signing, don't do it. Just don't do it. Co-signing, what that means is, let's say you've got a friend who's got bad credit, and so they come to you and they say, hey, will you co-sign this loan for me? What that means is that their credit is not good enough to get the loan that they want. So they're asking you to sign off on the loan with them. Well, you are fully obligated to that loan since you signed off on it, even though your friend says that, oh, they're going to take care of it and all. Obviously that person has got a record of that not being the case because their credit's not good. So what will happen is if this loan goes in default, you're probably not going to know about it for a while. The person who's actually the original person on the loan, the primary on the loan, they're going to probably get the harassing emails and all that kind of stuff. But when it actually goes to collection, time is money to those people. They're not going to mess around with the deadbeat who's not paying the loan. They're going to go after the cosigner because the cosigner had the assets to be able to pay the loan, and that cosigner is as legally obligated as the primary. So yeah, you're probably going to get blindsided, and since it's gone to collection, there's probably going to be other fees involved. You would have been better off, if they're really that good a friend, just taking out a loan in your own name. At least that way you'd have control of it, or do something, or just refuse, or come up with some other means. But co-signing is in all cases, almost all cases, not good. Loan application, yeah, we know what's going to be on there. And anyway, it's going to be the standard details, your net worth, assets minus liabilities. They'll be interested in that. APR is the term that has to be used. So there may be other rates on there, but not all of them will say APR. Somewhere on the actual loan application, there will be a rate, and it will be identified with the 3 letters or the spelled out annual percentage rate. And that's the only way you can make meaningful comparisons. So sometimes there'll be other teaser rates or other things in there, but somewhere in the fine print there's got to be something that identifies the actual annual percentage rate of the loan. So here's a guy looking at different loans. APR 10%, 13, 16. So yeah, total finance expenses, number of years, average. So yeah, sometimes there's little fees and other things charged in there, but all of those should be reflected in the APR, and so that's why you want to use the APR rather than just simple interest or something just as interest on it. That's not the way it works. This is what they're showing for a short loan. Now, keep in mind that it's not as dramatic. What I told you is completely valid in terms of you paying a lot more interest at first and a lot less interest later, and more principal towards the end of the loan. So because this is only whatever over the course of 12 months, just a year, the numbers are not going to change that much. They're still going to be higher. Here's $20 worth of interest, and here's month 12 only $1.76, but it's more dramatic when you get into home mortgages. How much should you spend on a car? So again, cars are not an asset. They're not an investment. They're get what you need to get, but don't get your wants and your needs confused. This can really wreak havoc with you if you get into the type of person who needs a new car every 3 years or whatever. You are just gonna, they'll love to have you as a customer because they are making a great deal of money off of you. And if you can steer clear of that, the way I've kind of got around it, and each to his own. There's a lot of personal things here, but I usually have a beater with a heater, not something reasonable like a 4Runner or something like that, and an older one, but they're solid. They're going to hold up. And then I always had something fancy. Not so much here in Alaska, but when I was in Europe, I had 6 or 8 different Corvettes and Vipers and things like that. But I'd buy those ones when they were, older and classic and didn't have many miles on it. And I didn't really want to drive them that much because I'd, put a bunch of miles on it and devalue them. But, I had a 4Runner for day-to-day use. And then I had, the Viper or the Vet or whatever to take on the Autobahn or up to the Nürburgring or whatever to race around with. But that, did very little damage to my finances because all those whatever classic kind of muscle car things, you could buy them for less here in the States and sell them for quite a bit more in Europe. But even that was kind of risky because insurance rates are high. So the Viper, for example, I had to go with liability only, which is kind of sketchy. But anyway, we'll talk more about that when we talk about car insurance. But it forced me to be a very cautious driver, which is not a bad thing. Anyway, consider buying a car. Credit, no debt solution, only pay cash. Paying cash may not be reasonable. I mean, I realize, when you've got kids and you got to get to work and your, livelihood is dependent on reliable transportation, and this is Alaska and the rest of that, My best vehicle is actually a truck, and the reason why that's the nicest one is because I haul my horses with it, and that's not something I want to be broken down on the side of the road with. 2 to 4 horses in the back of it, so that'd be bad. So I realize things change, but try and stay away from, some sort of vanity type thing and needlessly spending a ton of money. So personal preferences, price, condition, resale. So these resale things, and again, it's unique to Alaska. Alaska's a non-disclosure state. If you go to sell anything in, say, California, DMV needs to know the purchase price because they want to charge a sales tax on it. Well, in Alaska, the sales tax is not a thing. You don't have to tell them how much you sold it for. So anyway, it's those numbers, these Edmunds and Kelley Blue Book and all these other people, they would typically buy all that data from the state. The state has no problem selling vehicle prices to these third parties. But that data is not available here in Alaska because the state doesn't collect it. And the same is true with real estate sales. So it's good for privacy, but it just means the used car market, whether it be Facebook Marketplace or whatever, it's definitely buyer beware because people tend to sell things for too much, too little, too whatever. There's just zero consistency. So you can also, one other thing is, consider bringing something up from the lower 48 if that, if you have the means or willingness to do that. Repair expenses, certain vehicles can be quite high. Financing rates, sometimes there's teaser rates, that come through either your credit union, for example, or the companies themselves. But anyway, lots of things to consider. Lots of different parts going into a vehicle purchase. So here they're talking about Kelley Blue Book. Again, it's not necessarily accurate. And sometimes you'll see these things very much overstated, because what's happened is people will put some credence. They'll look to Kelley Blue Book or Edmunds or whatever to figure out what their vehicle is worth. Well, the used car dealers, they want to sell vehicles for as high a price as possible, and they also want to pay as little as possible for trade-ins. So one way that they've worked that out is Kelley Blue Book and Edmunds and all those are not necessarily independent companies anymore. They're affiliated, owned by the big car dealer conglomerates, and so they manipulate them as need be to maximize their profits. So not necessarily an independent source of information anymore. So they have this hypothetical Stephanie Spratt. She's going to be buying a vehicle, and so she's looking at, whatever expected value of a vehicle. I tell you what, silly Forerunners, I sound like I'm a, Forerunner fanboy, but they hold their value quite well. Sometimes you can find a good deal on them. But anyway, part of that has to do with reliability. Part of that has to do. So there's certain makes and models that tend to hold up in terms of value, and other ones that drop. More often than not, too, it's a lot of times it has to do with the luxury doesn't hold its value well. There's not a lot of status to an old luxury car. But old performance cars, that's just the opposite. So anyway, I found this out when I was looking at buying a Jaguar sports car versus a Viper. The Viper kept its value because it had nothing. Didn't even have anti-lock brakes, not even a trunk or windows. The windows didn't roll up. It was very, very primitive, but it held its value like a rock, whereas the Jaguar, it was the XKR, is a supercharged, but it was all leather seats, very nice. It's actually the Viper had leather seats, but this one was super fancy. And anyway, the values on luxury vehicles drop like a rock. Escalades versus pickups, the Escalade will drop, and the pickup will stay fairly steady. Lots of parts depending on what type of vehicle you're looking at. So insurance too can change based upon their accident history, theft rate, things like that. Negotiating price. Pardon me. So yeah, lots of different things going on here. If you are going to used car, and that's one of the reasons I tend not to buy a lot of used cars. I haven't bought a used car from a lot in a long time, but they, the standard games where they don't want to tell you how much the vehicle actually is. They want to know what your monthly payment is, and they'll stretch it out for a number of years, or they'll give you a whole bunch for your trade-in, but keep the vehicle price very high, or they'll bring the vehicle price down and then underpay you for your trade-in if you're doing the trade-in. Anyway, it's just not a pleasant experience. Selling used vehicles is not that hard, and you'll usually come out ahead, but I realize a lot of people don't like to do that, so you will pay a price if you let the dealer do it for you. Financing decisions. Typically, sometimes there's extenuating circumstances where there's a special deal from the manufacturer of the vehicle, but at the very least, when you go to purchase a vehicle, at least know what your credit union or bank what their rates are, and keep that in mind, and see how it compares to what the dealership will offer you. And then lastly, if you are sold that you're going to finance it with the credit union, and they're going to give you a much better rate. You probably don't want to bring that up when you're negotiating price with the dealership, because they may come down lower on the price, figuring that they're going to make a fair amount of money from you on the financing. And when they realize that you're essentially going to be paying cash, you're going to be getting the check from the credit union and bringing it to them, they may not be as eager to negotiate with you, since they're not going to make any money on the financing. So this is the game that they play with the vehicles. 3 years is probably artificially short at this point. 4 years, 5 years. 6-year loans are not that uncommon either. And people do tend to put a lot more miles on their vehicles now than they used to. So it's not unrealistic. When I was in Spain, for example, they for home mortgages, they had 60-year mortgages, which is kind of ludicrous. I mean, most people taking out the loans are not going to be around when they reach maturity. Leasing, almost always not a good idea. It's a great way for, you see Mercedes and BMW and some of these other vehicles, advertise that way so they can get you a lower price. But when you look at the all-in cost of the vehicle, probably would have been better off buying it, or perhaps getting something else. But anyway, keep in mind when you're leasing, it's really more of a long-term rental, because you don't actually own the vehicle. And so if there is damage, excess miles, all sorts of changes, it's usually written into the contract where it benefits the company that's leasing the vehicle, and not you as the ultimate consumer. The lessor benefits. Disadvantages: you don't own the car, still responsible for maintenance and charges. And yeah, if you drive too many miles, end the lease early, you just less freedom, less options. There are some business cases, but I've never found them for leasing. Student loans. So this is gets kind of political here. You're probably all aware that there was a offer of a student loan forgiveness and all that. It wasn't a genuine offer. That's outside of the, we have 3 branches of government, and the executive branch is not in a position where they can deal with financial issues like that. So if it would have gone through, the House of Representatives, it could have been potentially, because that's where they have the purse strings. They can make things like that. But since they aren't involved in it, that whole thing was found unconstitutional. It's being challenged, but now that the election's over, it's probably not going to be challenged very hard. So anyway, but student loans are, the problem with student loans is that paying them back, it comes at kind of the worst time in your life, when you should be, saving for a home and saving for this and saving for that, and now you're paying student loans in some of your prime years. So student loans can be, obviously necessary to get you the education, but try to go as easy with that as possible. And also, potentially if you're going to be a school teacher or something like that, where there is some forgiveness, the military sometimes will do that as well. That's something you might want to seek out. But yeah, is there a tradition of loan forgiveness in your given profession? The nasty thing about student loans is, they're administered by the federal government now, and so they're, the rules are such that they're not dischargeable in bankruptcy, which is kind of, I don't think anybody would say that. I think everybody would agree that that's pretty unreasonable. That's the one element. Just about everything is dischargeable in bankruptcy, except for student loans. So we'll go through more details on that, but you know, kind of a necessary evil, but keep in mind that um, they will impact your future. Home equity loans. So it's an interesting way of doing it. If you have collateral in your home, which means say you paid $300,000 for your home and it's appreciated and it's now worth $400,000, or you've had it for a while and you've paid down part of the loan. Anyway, you've got some. What equity means is that your home is worth more than you own on it. So it can be done a variety of different ways. Either the house appreciating or you paying it down. But if you take a loan for a home equity loan, it is tax deductible. So that's kind of nice. But it typically has to be used for home issues. Now, if you happen to have 60, 80 grand and you're going to buy a new boat and you decide, I'm going to get a home equity loan and buy that boat. Just keep in mind that the money that you can somehow show that some project was done regarding your home, nearing the value of 80 grand, or else you might have a problem. Yep, economic conditions, so does the value of the home. Again, we're not going to probably see the big swings in real estate. Things are starting to melt down in some of the hotter markets. I saw something, some recent articles about Austin and places like that where property values went through the roof and now they're coming back down. If you happen to buy at the top, you could run into negative equity, but I don't think that's going to be happening in Alaska. Interest rates. So when we get into variable interest rates, they're typically tied to an interest rate index. But there's usually caps on those. So we'll talk more about interest rates when we talk about home loans. So up to $100,000 is tax deductible. So that's a lot of times why people would pursue the home equity loan to get that tax deduction. If they're going to get a loan for something, at least get one that's tax deductible. So you failed the course, things have gone horribly wrong. You're now getting short-term loans in advance of your paycheck. So something took a turn for the worse somewhere in your financial life if you're getting the payday loan. Cost of financing is outrageous. Yep. They have different kind of schemes that they work to get the interest rate up quite high and not call it usury. Usually it sounds like I'm being redundant, but there are typically laws that prevent businesses from charging over a certain interest rate, but if they label them as fees or whatever, they'll get around this and they'll do these loans. So sometimes things can happen horribly wrong and you find yourself in this situation, but if it did, it's definitely something's gone wrong. So they're talking about options, and when the option is credit cards that charge about 20% interest, you can tell that the payday loan has gone wrong. There are also some loans out there that are put out there that are kind of disguised as loans. It's like when some of these tax companies, tax preparers offer instant refunds. Yeah, the federal government does not do things instantly. What these people will do is they will prepare your loan or prepare your taxes, get a amount that's going to be coming back to you in terms of refund, and then they'll loan you that money and then put the check from the IRS for your refund that will be paid to them since you've already got your refund. And so essentially you took a loan from that tax preparer. So you'd want to check and see what the interest rate and what the other fees are on there, but there's no such thing as an instant refund from the IRS. So that's that part. Purchasing and financing a home. So this is much more positive. I feel like I'm being such a negative person telling you, no, don't waste your money on a bunch of personal loans and a bunch of whatever credit cards and all this other stuff. But purchasing and financing a home, this can be a very positive thing for you, because it's a way to generate wealth. It's a lot of the elements within society that traditionally don't do well, are it's because they haven't invested in housing or were given housing, which seems like a nice thing, but when there's no wealth being transferred between generations because there was never a home ownership, it has long-term consequences. So a home can be very positive. 10 to 20% down payment is typical. Typical mortgage or fixed rate 30. That's what people do, but there's all sorts of ways to other programs out there, variable rates, and like I say, in the States I've never seen above 30. In Europe I've seen 60, since I mentioned that. Now some of these other things, it depends on the market. If you're, say, decide to move to San Francisco or New York or something like that, and you want to have a home price of no more than 2.5 times you're not going to find something. You're going to be homeless. Mortgage should not exceed 28%. Yeah, we would all like that, but depending on where you choose to live, sometimes housing is a higher proportion of your income. So some of these absolute averages or guidance, they don't always hold up. So what you need to do is, when you feel like you're getting ready to purchase a home, you need to go to even before you talk to somebody, a real estate person, you need to talk to one of the lenders, and typically a local lender, in this area you've got Home State, Residential, there's other ones. Anyway, you go in there, they're not all that different, and what they do is, they'll explain the process to you, and you'll go in there to get pre-qualified. So you'll fill out all these documents, and then they will tell you what type of loan, what amount you qualify for, and they'll typically charge you $50 for the credit report. And there's an understanding when you get the loan, you're going to come back to them, because there's a whole bunch of fees, and that's where they're going to make their money. You could go to somebody else. You go to Quicken or Rocket or whoever. Well, that's kind of the same company. You can use some of these out-of-state companies later on. But having sold real estate, I would advise you probably not to do it that way, because what real estate transactions can be pretty complex, and getting them to close could be kind of difficult. And when you've got mortgage companies that are not in the same time zone, don't necessarily know a lot about Alaska or some of the unique things about Alaska laws, they might not be very well versed, and it might cause the loan to be delayed or screw up the whole transaction. So there's, if you're a big national brokerage, you're not going to spend a whole lot of time dealing with, Alaska, that's got a total population that's smaller than, the majority of cities in the lower 48 big cities. Anyway, so what's going to happen is, let's say you go to one of these local mortgage brokers, you want to get pre-qualified, you fill out the paperwork and all that, and maybe now that you've got this pre-qualification letter, you seek out your real estate person, and you present them that pre-qualification letter. So now they're in a better position because they know what you can afford, because it's already been determined, and you move forward. So it just works out a little bit better. So that would be my advice. But obviously you can do what you would want. Affordable down payment. Yep. Closing costs and some of these other things. It's quite expensive to jump into your first home, and again, that's why it's already expensive enough. And if you're, mired with a bunch of debt for a vehicle you purchased and you kind of overdid it with the student loan perhaps, and you're trying to get that paid off, you might have to delay that house buying decision for a while, which is going to, put you in a more expensive position, because housing's going to appreciate, and housing, rather than you being in that market and benefited from it, you're going to be, on the sidelines for a while longer. So, yep, coming up with your mortgage payment. Allow for continued savings. It's important. You don't want to be completely house poor. You don't want to have all of your money going into a home, but I would rather have all of my money going into a home than a bunch of frivolous, bills too. So, and investing in your home is actually a form of saving. A home is an investment as opposed to a lot of other stuff, which is just an expense. So lessons learned. Don't go for the maximum you can afford. Okay? Don't buy above what you can afford. Home values don't always rise over time. Values can also drop. They can. Depends on the markets, though, typically. And consider current economic conditions and job stability. So, yeah, a lot of reasons to perhaps be a little nervous, but for the most part, money in real estate is probably the most solid investment you're going to make with your money. So, single biggest investment, yep. Compare the cost of renting versus buying. And there's other intangible things, the ability to, have your own yard and have pets and not deal with landlords. Now, sometimes you can get into really constrictive homeowner associations that may make it feel like you're, under their thumb, but if you can avoid that, that's good. Consider a condominium. I'm not a fan of those, and it's more than just personal preference. I mean, number one, yeah, I think they're kind of like apartments, so I'm not a fan of living in that condensed area. But one thing I came upon a number of occasions when I was involved in real estate was that it's quite common for condominium associations to have a clause in their contract which you sign to be in that condominium. In a condominium, you own everything from the paint and the interior of the home, right? You don't own the walls. I mean, once you get through the paint, you're into the condominium property. Once you go out on your porch, you're into the condominium's space. Parking lot, clearly the condominiums. So there's, you're an owner, but you're only an owner of the interior space. But the problem I had with condominiums is that this clause in their contracts that I saw quite often would limit the number of rentals in the condominium, complex. And so let's say you're in, a condominium, you have an ownership, and you for work or whatever, you decide you need to move, perhaps you're going out of state or something like that, and it's kind of a last minute thing. Well, the selling market's kind of weak, so I think we're just going to rent. Well, they may already have, say, 20-25% rentals, and that was their limit. So no, you cannot rent. You can only put it up for sale. And like I say, if the market's soft, that would force you into a position of either sucking it up or letting it go vacant or selling it at a reduced price. So I just don't like giving up that freedom. If this was a little house and I said, well, this I'm not going to sell right now, I'm just going to put renters in it, that's your decision. But in a condominium, you have another set of people getting a vote, which I I'm not interested in giving up that right to rent. Relying on a real estate agent. So I'm going to sound like a total shill for the real estate people, but the commissions during real estate transactions are paid by the seller. So you're really not hurting yourself by using an agent when you're buying a piece of property. And then the other thing I'll tell you is I went to a number of homes where people wanted to list a home, asked me to sell the home for them as a licensed agent, and I'd go through the process and kind of determine what their home was worth, and you find out what they want to sell it for. And in some cases, you'd find that the person who owned the home thought it was worth way more than what the market value was. And so, as the listing agent, you'd say, well, I'm not going to list it for that. We're just wasting our time. It's going to cost me money to place the ads and do all this stuff, and it's priced too high. It won't sell for that price. And so, things get a little heated, and the person would say, well, fine, then I'll just sell it myself. So the moral of the story here is when you see something out there for sale by owner, I would venture to guess 25-50% of those are way too high. And people who stubbornly think their homes are worth more and nobody wants to list it for them. Or, good on them, maybe they want to sell it and they don't want to pay the 6% commission. So they're like, I'm going to keep all that money myself and sell it for the same price. Well, that benefits them greatly, but me as the buyer, how does that benefit me? I'm not. Are they splitting what they would have paid in the commission? If they are, maybe I'm going to engage with them, but for the most part, I'm not. And so anyway, a lot of times you come across a real estate transaction and you'll, I've been out to people's properties and it's just, things are kind of a mess. The well doesn't work, this thing doesn't work, and it's like, you just bought this home? They said, well, it was for sale by owner. So a lot of times the inspections and things like that are not necessarily complied with, done, whatever, and they'll show up on subsequent transactions. So the well and septic or some of the other things may not have been taken care of. And when let's say you're involved in a for sale by owner transaction, and now you go to sell that home years later and you find out, oh, there were some things wrong that I didn't know about. If there's a real estate agent involved in that, number one, they're going to make sure those things are complied with because their license is on the line. And if they go to court, the agent is going to lose. I mean, that's just a given. They're a professional. The innocent buyer is, in almost all cases, going to win. So, and the penalties are harsh. And there's a lot of penalties related around disclosure. If the homeowner knows that the roof is faulty or something like that, and the agent becomes aware of that, or should have known, because the agent's going to have him fill out a questionnaire. The agent's not going to lie about that, not if they're smart, because they're gonna lose. So anyway, you would probably be more comfortable having a agent involved in the transaction, so that the disclosures are done and so the transaction is carried out properly. Now, there's exceptions. If your neighbor's selling the house and you're just going to do it for sale by owner, and maybe you're just going to get you can always just get a lawyer involved to make sure it's all legal and complied with. That's great. There's no reason to pay agents for that. So that's good. But if you're just going out on the market and you think you're going to save a bunch of money by doing the for sale by owner, it could be kind of challenging. And then also there's other things that are, I was in the military for a long time, and so I hadn't been in Alaska. And the first home I bought up here, I looked at a lot of things online and thought I found some great properties, and I didn't know the neighborhoods, I didn't know the avalanche zones, I didn't know the fact that being right up against mountains, sometimes you don't get sun till middle of summer. There's a lot that can go into it if that agent is good. Now, there's a lot of crappy agents out there who don't know jack and don't know anything. But I'm talking about an agent that's worth their salt. They will know all of that. And that, again, leads me right back to the whole pre-qualification thing with the loan. Those types of good agents are not going to be taking people who aren't, fairly serious about purchasing a home, because they don't want to waste time with them. And the person who's not serious about buying a home will be the person who hasn't talked to a mortgage company to find out what their finances are. So, if you're not pre-qualified, any agent that's worth their salt is not going to show you homes. So, anyway, other things, yep. I think we may have looked at that. I got kind of long-winded there. Maintenance, school systems. So the big picture on this is, let's again look at this hypothetical situation. Well, I'm just right out of college. I don't have kids. I don't anticipate getting married. I don't care what the schools are like. Yeah, you do. Because the problem is that you have to buy something as if you're going to sell it later on. So the person that you're going to try and sell this home to in 3 to 5, 10 years, they are going to care about a lot of the neighborhood stuff. You don't want anything that's too unique, too weird. You want something that's, going to be fairly easy to sell. You don't typically want the biggest home in the neighborhood or the worst home. You want kind of middle of the road. I always like things on the edges too. The edge of a golf course, the edge of a river, the edge of a forest. I don't like to be buried in the center. But anyway, and I think I've done that for most places just because it's better, but it also makes the house more valuable. Market analysis. So this is what I was talking about, trying to figure out how much a home is worth. But again, some real estate people are so focused on the home. If you looked at my home, you'd realize I'm not one of those people. I bought this particular parcel because of the land. The home I'm in it's a knockdown, and it will be knocked down by eminent domain or me or whoever. They're going to put a bike path right next to it, and I think the borough is going to be buying it out. But in any case, I bought it for the land that came with it. So if you're just doing price per square footage of the home, well, is it on a quarter-acre lot or is it on a 10-acre lot or a 100-acre parcel? I mean, there's more than just price per square foot. So, but some guys will just quote, the price per square foot, and there's a lot more parameters. The quality of construction, the style, the neighborhood, a lot more. There's no easy formulation. What they're doing when they're trying to do a market analysis, they're looking for comps, comparable sales. So they're looking for a home in a similar neighborhood and similar condition, trying to come up with values. But just using square foot alone is not going to be a valid comparison. So, price of homes. So, what's happening right now, and you're seeing it, it's all supply and demand, right? And right now, what's the big factor on supply and demand are interest rates. As interest rates go up, there's people that are squeezed out of their they thought they could afford to buy a home, but now interest rates have gone up and the payments are no longer affordable. So that means there's fewer buyers out there. So it's supply and demand. Now there's a larger supply of homes and there's fewer buyers because some are priced out. So demand for homes is down, the supply is coming up, and the price is going to drop. Or just flatten. Flatten is more common here in Alaska. If prices go down by 1% or 2%, it'll be called a real estate crash. If the market tanks by 40%, they'll talk about a market slowdown in the stock market. Real estate is just so much more, whatever. There's a lot of inertia with real estate. It doesn't move that quickly. in typical neighborhoods. If you're in Miami, Phoenix, I guess Austin, anyway, there's certain places that go way up and way down. It's boom and bust. In places like this, not so much. So, yeah, mortgage defaults, home prices. A lot of things sort of changed after 2008, but it's just the applications got longer. And then certain times, they'll say, oh, they're whatever the policies are discriminatory or whatever. We need to give more loans. And back in 2007, 2008, people were so overextended because they were under the impression that real estate could only go up. And so they were making loans to people they call ninjas. No income, no job, no assets. The people who had no reason to think that they could buy one home, much less 4 or 5 homes. And so everything kind of came apart. So anyway, they just made the process a lot more stringent, but things kind of wear off after a while. Yep, zoning laws can affect desirability, cannot. So again, yeah, commercial development right in the middle of your nice little sedate home areas is not good. But other times it could be prevent you from making any modifications to the home. Second opinion on your valuation. Brokers represent sellers. Yeah. Anyway, sometimes it's tough to get a good, honest opinion. You'll get a appraisal, but the appraiser knows what you're paying for it, so they don't necessarily come upon their numbers in a vacuum. I would not take it as that much of a valuation that say you paid $300,000 for a home and it appraises right at $300,000. Yeah, that's not so much a coincidence as it is just the system. If there's a drastic valuation difference, maybe it'll come in lower, but it doesn't absolutely mean that, it's worth it. Negotiating price almost always happens. It's an art. It's helpful to have, a salesperson who's done this a time or two before to kind of help you. If you go too low, if you lowball them too much, you may insult them. Or, like I've said before, if you come in there and you appear to be non-serious, normally with an offer letter, accompanied with that will also be this, whatever they call it, 80% letter or something like that, a letter from the mortgage company attesting to the fact that you have the funds available and that this transaction can actually happen, that this person is capable of getting a loan for that price. That can make the difference in the deal because people want to see deals go through to completion. They don't want to take the house off the market and then find out that the person, didn't know what they were talking about, didn't have the funds, and now they've got to relist the home and re-show the home, and it's just cascades. Nobody wants that. So if you want to negotiate from a strong position, keep it realistic. But yeah, you can typically, doesn't hurt to negotiate as long as you do it within certain limits. Down payment. So different ways around that. VA, a lot of times you can skip the down payment. PMI, private mortgage insurance, kind of painful. Let's say you don't have the 20%. You can sometimes still purchase the home and you'll have to pay PMI. And I did this on my very first home that I bought. And this was one of those markets that was exploding. I was in Las Vegas at the time. Flying out of Nellis, and anyway, an Air Force base down there, and you kind of had to jump on properties, and so found a home, bought it. It didn't qualify for VA because of the part of the things. It was just the market was moving too fast. So bought the home, and had to pay a private mortgage insurance. It was about $100 a month extra on top of the mortgage because we did not put down the full 20%. But after about 4 months, I had the home reappraised. The value had gone up by 20 or 30 grand, and now that 20 or 30 grand added to the amount that we put down in down payment now gave us the 20%, and so now we no longer had to pay the private mortgage insurance. So you have to be smart about it, but it's one way if you don't have the down payment. Closing costs. Whew. Closing costs are, there's all these little fees, and some are assessed to the seller, some are the buyer. Home insurance, all this other stuff. And it all adds up. It's typically about 10 grand for each of you. So it's pretty high. And it's not like the real estate agents are getting it all. Real estate agents, the way they work, the good ones, they start out, they're strictly commission. And so each month they start out about, say, 3-4 grand in the hole to pay for their office and everything else. And until they sell some homes that month, or have some listings that close, they're not getting paid. So there are a few real estate agents that do very well, but they're kind of the exception. A lot of those guys don't make as much as you would think. Points, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. It just doesn't happen. What happens is if there's a interest rate that's, say, 5%, and for some reason you want to pay 4.5%, you can buy points from the lender, and you give them a certain number of thousands of dollars, and they will sell you the 4.5 interest rate. It gets real complex, and it's just not typically done. So you always see points out there. Points just refer to interest rate points, buying down the rate, but doesn't happen very often. Fixed rate mortgage, typically the way it's done. Interest rates expected to rise. Yep, may be assumable. Generally not. Most mortgages are not assumable, but anyway. So fixed rate means that the mortgage interest rate and the payment are going to stay the same for the entire length of the loan. So if it's the typical loan, a fixed rate 30, that means that this house payment of $2,000 a month right now is going to be $2,000 a month 30 years from now, when $2,000 isn't much money at all later on. You can also get into variable interest rates and other things. We'll talk more about that, adjustable rate mortgages. Amortization table. So this is that same concept of where we split up the payments over the course of each payment period. So a 30-year, when you talk about a 30-year mortgage, what you're really talking about are 360 payments. And so, again, we're dealing with months. So this is a 30-year mortgage. So the payment in this case is always the same, always this $537 in this case. The principal, the amount paid towards the actual mortgage, the loan is $120, but the interest is $417. When you get to the end of the loan, it's still $537, just as it is here, but $534 goes to the principal and just $3 goes to the interest. So if you ever hear somebody complain about, I'm not getting any tax deduction anymore, that's because only $3 of their $530 payment, $37 payment is interest. And the interest is the part that's tax deductible. Go figure. Large the mortgage, large the mortgage. Large is the interest rate, the larger. So some things kind of go without saying. Here's another one, same example, you know, nearly $1,500. Interest paid, almost $5,000. So this is over the whole year. Here's the 30th year, almost all principal, very little interest. And if you wanted to see it again, longer the maturity, the lower the monthly payment. Now, I've had this discussion with people, to include my brother. I always take 30 years, and he'll take 15 years or whatever. For me, if I wanted a 15-year, I would get the 30-year and just make double payments for a while and pay it off in 15 years. As long as there's no early payment, prepayment penalty, which there typically are not on mortgages, there's nothing to stop you from paying it off early. Doubling up payments, making payments directly against the principal. But let's say if things go south or things get kind of whatever, you're having some tough times. And sometimes this is like medical stuff that's completely unforeseen. You could slow down. You could just do your 30-year mortgage. Whereas if you're in 15-year mortgage, you're committed to that. So I like the flexibility. Anyway. So, yep. So, obviously, small amount, small payment. Large amount, triple the payment. Triple the amount. So, it's all linear. Nothing magic there. Estimating. Yeah, the websites are actually better than just the straight calculators because they'll ask questions about insurance and taxes and other things that are normally rolled into your mortgage payment. When you pay your monthly payment, they really like to have the taxes and the insurance on the mortgage company. They want to go have you pay it into an escrow account, and so that they pay the taxes, the mortgage company does, rather than you pay directly. The reason why they like that is because they like to know that their property is insured and the taxes are paid on their property. Because you live in the home. You may think you've got home ownership, but if you've got a loan, it's theirs. You could go to bankrate.com. They're just fine. And they would have a calculator on there that would tell you. This is what's happening right now. So people, who are saving up to buy a home, and a couple years ago, and I've got a mortgage that's 2.85 or so. So, it'd be down in the 350 range or something for that amount of money, whatever it is, per 100,000. So anyway, you can see what's happened. This is kind of where rates are going. So the person looking for a home who was going to spend whatever amount of money, that monthly payment has skyrocketed from less than $500 to, above $700. So we're not quite at 8% yet, but anyway, this short, this extra, because nobody's buying anything for $100,000. So if you tripled all these numbers, 300,000, 400,000, you can see where people get priced out quite quickly when the interest rates go up. Now, if the values are coming down, the home prices are coming down, there is, some strategic thought in saying, well, I'm going to suck it up, pay, get the loan for 7% or 6 something, whatever it is now, and I'm hoping interest rates come down, and when they do, I'm going to refinance and scrap this old loan. The loan I had for 2 point whatever, I think that initially started out at 4%, which wasn't a bad loan, but when the interest rates started dropping even more, I think I refinanced that loan about twice. And that's again why it's nice to have a local mortgage guy that you've dealt with. I've got a guy on my cell phone who's kind of a friend of mine because I've done a few transactions with him, and call him up and say, hey, the rates are down by 1%. Is it worth it? And he'll say kind of yes or no, because there are some fees involved in establishing a new loan. So you don't want to do it if it just dropped, a tenth of a point or something. That's not going to make any sense. But if it's down by 1% or even 0.5%, it probably does make sense to refinance, and that's common. It's done. So another characteristics of 30 years. So yeah. So anyway, I'm a fan. And again, do what you like, but for me, I'll take the 30. And if I want to pay it off in 15 years, there's not a problem. It's like people out there who say, we ought to make taxes higher. People should pay more tax, especially the millionaires. It's like, why don't you start doing that? If you feel the government's entitled to more money, there is no law out there that says you can't pay more tax than you want to. And, we'll applaud that. I guess it's slightly different, but anyway, you can get the 30-year mortgage and pay it off quicker than 30 years if you're so inclined, is what I'm saying. Now, if you've got a mortgage for 2.85%, that's a great deal. You don't want to pay that one off in a hurry. You want to get the money that you would have used to pay that off and invest it in something else, because almost all investments you can get more than 2.85%. So that's this whole concept of you're renting money. You have to look at what the competitive uses are. Just because you still have a mortgage out there doesn't mean that you're poor and you can't manage your money. It means that you're not paying it off early because you've got better uses for the available cash you have on hand. Okay, adjustable rate mortgages. Again, kind of a gut check here. Things can go either way. If interest rates scream up further, you could be on the hook and maybe be priced out of the mortgage or not. Typically, an adjustable rate mortgage is going to be quite a bit lower. I bought a house in Germany with an ARM, and I think the going rate was about 5% at the time, and I bought it for 3.8% and kept it. And it was good, and the bank, the rate was linked to the interbank rate, and that because it was Europe, was the LIBOR, the London interbank rate or whatever. But it could only go up by a certain percent each year. It couldn't go from 3% to 8% a year. It could only go to 4 and then 5, and it would have taken many years to get up to the 8%. But anyway, it didn't happen, and I had the loan for the duration, and I paid a few percent below the prevailing. So that was more of a gutsy move. What I could have done was I could have started with the ARM, and then if interest rates came down a little bit, I could have refinanced it and put it under a fixed mortgage. Right now, I would say most people would be taking an ARM because they can't afford to buy a house without it, or it'd be fairly unpleasant to buy a house. So if the normal rates are say 6% and they get an ARM for say 4%, they might take the adjustable rate mortgage and hoping that rates are going to come down a little bit, and or hoping their salary is going to go up a little bit. But anyway, worst case is it can be kind of bad if the interest rates really go screaming up, but that's not very likely. And like I say, you have a few years to figure that out because they're indexed. They can only go up so quickly. You might have to sell the home or something like that, but you're probably not going to lose it. It's not going to be that catastrophic in most cases. Anyway, initial rate usually lower. Interest rate index, it's tied to an index, tied to a normal banking rate. So it'll be, prime plus 3 or something like that. Different terms, but there'll be some sort of national index involved. And the frequency, the rate adjustments, that's what I'm saying. it can only be adjusted once per year. It can only go up by, say, 1% per year. That might be something you could live with. You have to read the fine print. Caps on adjustable rate mortgages. Yep, there might be a cap or limitations on the fluctuations. Yep, and there's a lot of things. I had a really good banker in Spain who was a personal friend, and anyway, he carried through with me up in Germany. So sometimes you can do well. Owning versus renting. Yeah, so the good thing about owning a home is that with a mortgage, that payment's going to stay the same. Renting, it's typically going to be indexed to inflation. Overall, though, owning is just about always going to be a little bit more expensive because of the fact that when you own a home, you tend to dump a lot of money into, gardening, and you'll become a slave to Home Depot or Lowe's or whoever, and you'll do a lot of stuff. But that's also quality of life issues towards the positive. Renting a home, if the advantages are, you have some flexibility, but a lot of times the living situation may not be ideal. When they say, the maintenance and taxes and the insurance, yeah, those are kind of figured into your rent. So the reason why your rent is such and such is because the landlord is paying some of these amounts for you. The reason why owning might be more fortuitous is that the taxes in this case are deductible, and you are building equity, and you are able to deduct some of your expenses and some other things. So a lot of ins and outs. It's usually there's more concrete factors other than just your personal preference, but for wealth accumulation, real estate is one of your best investments. Other types of mortgages, yeah, some schemes. Some of these kind of went away. Some of these balloon mortgages, they'd go with very small payments and then a huge, large balloon payment at some time in the future, and you just don't see that creative financing as much post 2007, 2008. Interest-only mortgages, yeah. These things encouraged a lot of speculative behavior. You'd have people with whatever. You could watch shows like the Big Short or something like that, and you'll kind of get an understanding of what happened. The main problem was there was just a confidence that the stock or that the real estate market would only go up, and therefore any investments in real estate were completely without risk, and that was not the case. Refinancing, yep. So must pay additional closing costs. So there will be some closing costs will come up, and so that's what I'm saying. It's got to be at least half a point, probably a full point, before it makes sense to refinance. And that's it. So I'll put out the video. There was no homework listed on this one. Nope. Just to double check. Nope. We're going to be coming up on the midterm here after a while. I'll put that data out there. I'll talk more about that next week. And I'll put the video out there. Till next week. Golly, that was a long one. Sorry.